Yeah, we were coming out of a panel yesterday. I mean, coming into a panel, and it was coming out of it. We were waiting to go. It was the Marvel, how to break into comics the Marvel way. And we were like, so they're live streaming. Can we curse whatever? And we
What a
saw Howard
random
Chaykin
time
coming
to
out,
start
and
a
we were
panel.
like, oh, okay. Howard
I
was
said,
on
what
the
a
panel.
random time to start a panel.
There was cursing going on, and they were okay.
Yeah, waterfall.
Yeah, I always kind of gauge it with, depending on the panel, and I guess this is pretty open. Like, we're doing a power specific thing,
Right.
or this was obviously like more adult themed than
Right.
Rift, but
Yeah.
Mixed company.
It's funny in San Diego how at the behind the thing it says, remember, many of your attendees may be under 18.
yeah. Tell us about cosplayers.
Yes, Mike is the artist on Powers, and that's what I'm most familiar with. Christos writes Angel and Faith,
I know.
and
Stay on the escalators all day waiting for the
among
person to
other
get
things.
Yeah.
So
And
appropriate.
Kelly Sue
Or
is working
the old
on
guys like us sitting around going, where was all this when we were single? You know?
Captain Marvel.
Yeah,
Okay,
where was this when we were single?
and she does Ghost Rider. Okay.
Actually, I had a conversation with Neil Adams. He did it next one. I was like, how'd it go? Oh, it was great. There's this really attractive young lady on the panel. But it's Mark Ridley. It's an attractive young lady on the panel with me. I said, I know, man. When was that? When we were young? And he was like, seriously?
Yeah, there was and like even going back to like when I got in the industry, like very early '90s.
Yeah.
There was hardly any girls, whether they were attending or as
Yeah.
creators. You know,
Mid
now
90s, too.
and people would make that joke now about there
Yeah.
not being enough female, and there still isn't enough female participation, but it's hugely different
Yeah.
than what it used to
Oh,
be.
it's
Like, I'm like,
crazy.
you don't know, man.
Yeah, no,
you don't know.
seriously.
Okay.
Seriously.
All right, we're going to go ahead and start. Kelly Sue DeConnick will be joining us hopefully soon. Thank you for coming to the From Victim to Hero panel. My name is Anna Snyder, and I am moderating this panel because this is actually a subject matter that I'm very interested in, and I've presented this panel in different formats at other smaller cons. And I have this really awesome guest panelist here to talk about the subject matter of female protagonists versus male protagonists and what that journey looks like. And starting at this end of the table, we have Mike Oeming, who is the artist on the most amazing thing ever, Powers. I love that book. It's
Thank
like,
you.
it's a yay. Christos Gage, who is the writer for Angel and Faith comic for Dark Horse, among other things. Yay, thank you for being here. And then we have Scott Allie, who is the editor-in-chief for Dark Horse, as well as a very prolific writer in his own right.
Thanks.
So one of the things that where I would like to start actually is with what I'm most familiar with and what actually got me interested in the subject, and that is the characters of Joss Whedon. And that is not where we're going to limit our conversation. We can definitely jump off into other storylines and other writers. But basically, my interest is that in the journey, in a hero's journey, it differs for the male protagonist versus female protagonist. And my interest comes from the fact that, in my opinion, and what I've seen, is that for female protagonists, oftentimes, their journey starts with being a victim, things happening to their body rather than outside, which is where it seems to happen most often for male protagonists. And the writers and artists and everybody on this panel, they all have different takes on this because they've all been working with different forms of the female protagonist. For instance, Dina in Powers would not fit into that. I don't think she would fit into that description.
No,
No.
she's definitely not anybody's victim or empowered by anything. She's kind of a borderline sociopath. So she definitely has damage, but not in a sort of like Red Sonja kind of way.
Right.
Which I also worked on.
Well, and yeah, like explain what you mean by Red Sonja. They might not know why.
Yeah.
Red Sonja is kind of the epitome of
So
the victim.
sort of the epitome of that is kind of like the sort of cliche 80s revenge film or 70s revenge film in which a woman is usually raped or beaten severely, and then goes on a revenge trip to avenge herself in some way. And anybody with a healthy mind knows that that's not realistic, that just striking out with violence isn't going to change anything. It's not going to heal the emotional or spiritual wounds that came out of such an attack. But unfortunately, typically in comics, it's just used as a catalyst to, you know, unleash on mayhem and violence and craziness and stuff. And as we all know as adults, violence only begets more violence. So it's way more complicated than that. And the best writers can take those same elements and then, you know, use that as a springboard to really examine that whole situation. Gail Simone's currently taking over Red Sonja. When I was writing Red Sonja, that was definitely something that I was concerned about. Like, oh, this is so icky, the way it was always kind of handled. What can we do with it? And we kind of found other ways to, you know, you have to really explore that territory. And like the idea of somebody getting strength from being attacked like that is very shallow. Like it's only the very beginning of something much larger. And usually we don't examine that too much.
What I think is interesting about Red Sonja is her strength actually comes from, in a very sort of, you know, melodramatic way, but I mean fantasy world kind of way, taking control of her body back, which is I won't have sex with anybody unless they can defeat me in battle, because, you know, that was what her goddess said, you'll lose your strength if you do this or whatever. But in a way, it's basically like her taking control. Now, she does wear the chainmail bikini, but in a way, that's kind of like, hey, look at this. You want it? Come get it. You know what I mean? And I will kill you. So...
Yeah, like like the way we handled it in Red Sonja was it was like a rattlesnake. Yeah. Like, so a rattlesnake has its rattle, and that's what she was wearing. She was wearing like a visual warning. Yeah. It was almost like it was a dare to try and touch me again. Yeah. Or to take advantage of anybody.
Exactly.
I mean, that's still pretty thin, but as close as I could.
Robert E. Howard, noted feminist. Actually, it was...
he had nothing to do with that character.
No, I know. It was Roy Thomas.
Yeah, we could blame Roy Thomas.
I blame Roy Thomas.
But even at that time too, like for as flawed as that was, you have to remember what was when Red Sonja the comic came around in like the early 70s.
Yeah.
There, you know, that was the first. Despite how flawed that is, that was the first female character was still kind of taken seriously on some level. Because up to then, it was always like Sue Storm, who would be, you know, the wife, basically with and she has superpowers. You know, there wasn't, you know, so while it was flawed, it was the beginning of. I hate the word empowerment because it's misused so much, but it's the beginning of that. It's the beginning of like a female character being somebody. So now it's strange because Red Sonja is the kind of the opposite in some ways of that, but at the time it was something different.
It was. And you know what I thought was interesting? I was trying to think of male characters who something happens to their body as the beginning of their thing, and I thought of Jonah Hex, which hadn't occurred to me. I'm a big Jonah Hex fan, but his face was scarred by... he was taken in by an Apache tribe. He had a rivalry with his foster brother, ended up killing him in battle, but it looked as if he had cheated, so they scarred his face, and then he was not accepted. He was cast out, and that was pretty interesting because he wears that on his face every day.
Right.
So I thought that was kind of interesting. But you're right. The classic definition is the male hero, something happens to someone he loves, Batman.
Right,
you know?
Right. So, do you have anything to ask? Okay. So it's interesting that you should talk about how Red Sonja was in the 70s became this first female not superhero, but female character to be taken seriously. And so do you think that it had to go from one extreme to the next before we could find this middle ground?
Well, Red Sonja came out of comics at a time when comics were so much just like power fantasies for 14-year-old boys. So I think the guys writing toward those power fantasies weren't able to come up with anything more, you know, sophisticated or balanced, you know, and that idea that the only way you can have a female, you know, a heroine is to do something like that to her. I don't know if Red Sonja started that, you know, trope or if it was picking up on something else, but you saw so much of that for a while. And still today, you know, I think it's kind of natural. One of Mike's characters from his book, Victories, for us, like Dee Dee Mao, I don't know that she's the victim of a person or an antagonist, but she's a victim of her own, you know, sort of like fractured psyche that drives her to be a hero. So in a way, it's like with Dee Dee, you kind of have a victim who's not the victim of someone. She's just sort of victimized personality, but she's turning it into a power, turning it into heroics. And I think that's like an interesting evolution of the Red Sonja sort of model.
It's also an interesting, like you said, when expand the definition of victim or something happening to someone, like, is Angel a victim? You know, he was forcibly turned into a vampire.
Actually,
Then
that's pretty close because he's, you know, something was forced on
And then
him,
his soul
it
was
changed,
forced,
it-
yeah.
you know, it's kind of a, you know, loose, what's the word I'm looking for, parallel, you know, metaphor.
Yeah.
Right, but with him, like a hypothetically good thing. You know, he was a villain and a vampire.
right.
But then someone forced him to be more human, and that's what made him a soul. It's much different than, you know, what happened to Red Sonja.
Right. But initially, he was turned into a vampire.
Turned
That
into
was
a vampire,
forcible
right.
as well. It's who knows?
Well, it's always weird when, you know, those parallels are made and there's fantasy and a very real world thing that is rooted in. And that's where a lot of the bad taste comes from, I think,
Yeah.
is like the idea of, like, oh, get bit into a vampire, I'm so conflicted, but it's cool because I live forever, versus, you know, I've been sexually assaulted, and
Yeah.
it just sucks, and that's the end of that. Not cool, man.
Yeah.
Well, what bothers me, my wife and I wrote for Law and Order SVU, so, you know, we've done a fair amount of research into sexual assault and what it's like to be a sexual assault survivor. And, you know, for me, it's like, okay, if you're going to do this with a character, it's legitimate. It's something that happens in the real world, but do it. Don't make it, you know, bitten by a radioactive spider equivalent. You know what I mean? It's something that people need to deal with. It's something that affects some people in very different ways. Some people get very angry. Some people get, you know, withdrawn and you know, if people handle it in different ways. But don't just, you know, what bothers me is when I see it as a, you know, a device. You know,
It's a shortcut.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, how do I show that this is a flawed character or like a compromised character? Oh, rape.
yeah.
You know, and it's used so often. I used to love SVU back when you guys worked on it, but eventually that show so completely jumped the shark, and I just couldn't take another goddamn rape story.
Right.
It was just
Right.
Yeah.
every friggin'
And you
Tuesday
think about
night.
it, Conan has exact same origin as Red Sonja. You know, he's in his village, he's being raised, marauders come in and kill everybody, but they didn't need to turn his origin into a rape story,
Right.
or, you know, to use that device to. I mean, you could have done the exact same thing with Red Sonja, and she'd still be just as powerful. You know, she was a character who saw her family murdered in front of her. You know, why do we need the extra
Right.
layer of, you know?
Yeah.
Why isn't that
it's-
enough?
Yeah.
Well, because one of the things that was curious to me that got me rolling on this, especially with the Joss Whedon characters, River in Firefly and Serenity and Echo in Dollhouse had, to me, it's a very literal translation of the things that were done to them becoming the source of their power. And instead of it controlling them, they start to control it. And I'm wondering if that's maybe a different take on the victim to hero, or the assault on the body, and how it manifests, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
With River, if I'm not mistaken, the implication was she had some degree of psychic power beforehand, but what they did, they stripped away her amygdala, her ability to process emotion or something to that effect.
Fix.
Yeah.
I just got a text from Kelly Sue. She's almost here.
Okay, great.
I think it's interesting that with a lot of hero characters, what puts them on the path to being a hero is somehow having their choices taken away from them.
Yeah.
Like a lot of characters have that. It's not specifically to women. It's just that with female characters, so often that like limited choice has to do with sex of some sort and just being physically victimized, where you don't have to do that to create a male hero.
Well, and also because unfortunately there's just a lot of men writing these comics.
Right.
You know, and it's only recently, we were just talking about this, like, if when I first started doing conventions in the early 90s, it was super rare to see a female at the
At a
convention,
show at
whether
all.
they were a creator or a visitor. So when I even hear people today saying, oh, like they'll joke around about their, you know, not seeing a lot of women, or like, oh my God, it's so different. I'm like, wow, that was only 15 years ago. It was like seeing, you know, like an extinct animal walking on.
Just a total boys club.
Yeah, but now we have more voices, and that's what's important is that, you know, it also keeps us sharper knowing that you're not in a boys club anymore, you know.
Right.
And I think maybe that was the failing or shortcoming of a lot of the earlier stuff was it was a boys club, and the audience was a boys club, and so they weren't really challenged to even think much beyond that. So the stories we did get from back then that did touch on those issues that were done well, I mean, those are should be as applauded as much as the stuff that we're kind of like going like, ugh.
So would you, I'm gonna, this maybe, feel free to not answer the question, but would you say that perhaps using that trope is kind of lazy writing when you have so many other options available
Well,
to
it
you?
can be. I mean, it's not always. Sometimes it's a great choice. The problem is that it's so overused today that it's probably not the best choice you can make just because. I think the reason that rape became such a powerful device in this kind of writing, when suddenly it was okay to really say the word and really put it out there in genre fiction, it's so powerful. It's such a powerful, terribly, powerful experience. But then it gets used and used and used again, and every single TV show. It's just everywhere, and so it loses its power. But it's every bit as horrid. But as a narrative device, it loses its.
I don't
oomph.
think it
So
would
now
lose
you're-
its power
real
if it
quick,
were.
we got a
Oh, hey.
got Kelly Sue.
Kelly Sue.
Yay.
Yay.
I'm an idiot.
I had to be led here.
By me, which is really sad.
I've been in this room for another panel, but I didn't have a guide this time. I was like, what'd I miss?
We're
So-
talking
Not
about
much.
rape.
Yeah, a lot of rapey talk.
Yeah, we were talking, right now we were just talking about how is sexual assault a lazy writing tool, and Scott was saying that it actually can be a good choice, but it's just gets used so frequently that it loses its power as a good narrative device.
And becomes lazy. But Kelly's very passionate about these sort of topics.
And really anything. What do you got? Yeah, no, sexual assault is a thing that happens. I don't think that ideally, I don't think any occurrence should be off limits, handled well. Just the same way that I don't. My goal is to teach my children, and they're only 2 and 5, so I could blow this spectacularly or just completely be wrong. But to teach my children that there is no bad language, there is that there are words that aren't appropriate in different contexts, but that like if you're anyway. But what I would not be sad if we were to call a moratorium on rape at least in superhero comics for a few years, just to see if we could do it, in the same way. I'm not a fan of, and I've done it, and it's lazy writing, and I can say so because I've done it. I had a character kill a dog. Because you know what proves that somebody's a really bad guy? Kill a dog. Who kills a dog? Bad guys.
I've said that you can have your character do any horrible amount of things, but as soon as they harm or kill an animal, that's it. They're done.
Yeah,
They're
same
just a
thing in
gross-
movies.
Yeah.
Meteors are raining down from the sky, and children are blowing up, and families are dying and burning to the ashes, and then the dog leaps through the flames to safety.
Yeah.
The audience loses their mind.
Yeah, no, I did it in a one-shot, and I needed this villain to be really bad, and I only had a limited amount of space to do it, and I was up against a deadline, killed a dog. I hate signing that book. Every time somebody brings me that book, I'm like, I killed a dog! So, yeah, I would prefer that we not be hacks. That'd be awesome.
You don't have rent to pay? I mean,
Yeah, on the other side of the argument.
In everyone's defense.
no, I mean, my feeling, I agree with you, especially in superhero comics. My thing is, if you're going to do it, then really deal with what you're doing. If you're going to, and I would be interested, yes, sexual assault is a thing that happens. Guess what? It also happens to men. I would be interested. I was actually just talking with Scott about this. That Faith sexually assaulted Riley in the Buffy books, and I mean, the Buffy books. In the Buffy show, there was a show.
There was a show
There was a
before
show?
the comics.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
before we were doing the comics.
You know, and I wouldn't mind doing something with that.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, but the point is, you're right. Let's not be hacky about it. Let's not be cliched. If you're going to do it, then really understand what you're doing. If it
And
hasn't,
let's try to not make it sexy.
yeah.
Too.
Oh, yeah.
That's a thing that
Yeah.
I am not into. As
That's a bad thing.
you know, while everyone is entitled to what turns them on in the privacy of their own home, I think when there is a difference between erotica that is written for that purpose, in which I feel like, you know, well, all the rules are off at that point, and then books where we pretend to be wagging our finger at something that we're deliberately making salacious.
Right.
Yeah.
The Rob Zombie's first Halloween movie did that. There's this totally extraneous bit where some attendants rape a patient in Michael Myers' room, I think, and it's shot to, you know, like I watched this with some friends of mine and saw that scene and we were just like, oh my God, he is in love with these shots of this nameless character getting pointlessly raped in front of Michael, as though that somehow motivates Michael Myers. Terrible, 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 but it was just like, hey, his fans are going to love it, you know.
Yeah.
Rob's, not Michael's.
Yeah. Although Michael's fan, you know.
You never know. We're a mixed bag.
You know, I just wrote an arc on Crossed for Avatar, and if you look back now, you can't really do that without, you know, the Crossed, they kill and they torture and they rape. That's what they do. They're basically, for a Whedon audience, they're the Reavers from Firefly, so you've got to go there. And my whole thinking was, if I'm going, now I don't know how the artist is going to draw it, but my whole thinking was, if I'm going to do it, I want it to be as horrible as possible. And actually, if you look at the Garth Ennis issues, he virtually always portrays it like that. So yeah, I mean,
But in comics, it's really, like, you're at the mercy of the artist a little bit.
you
Yeah.
are.
We did a book, Green River Killer. We did a graphic novel of the Green River Killer, written by the son of the detective Tom Jensen, who tracked him down, figured out who it was. We did this book, and it was written by Tom's son, Jeff, who was very concerned with portraying everything right. And Jeff's house was, you know, reeling from all this horror that was going on in Seattle at the time. And before we had Jonathan Case on the job, the guy who wound up drawing the book, somebody else was drawing it, and we couldn't get him to make the scenes not sexy enough, if you understand that sentence. And it was like we felt it was important to go in the extreme. If you look at From Hell by Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell, there's a lot of violence towards women. The way it's drawn, it feels like violence, and nothing about it looks fun or, you know, remotely
Hot.
sexual or hot. It looks like a mess happened to somebody. And we wanted to make sure, if not going that far, at least to have nothing titillating, nothing that looked at all attractive about this stuff, and to you know, objectify these women who went through this thing. These aren't just, you know, characters in a book. These are people that went through this, who still have families reeling from what happened. And you know, we wound up getting an amazing job out of the artist who did the book, who's here at the show someplace. But it was important to do it right and to not make it salacious at all.
There's I'm working on a Western right now with Emma Rios, and it is it's written by me, so there are a lot of women in it, so I was like, well, can I write a Western in the vein of spaghetti westerns, and you know, we wanted to have this, like, you know, old school 70s feel to it, and I was like, can I write that without sexual violence and without the threat of sexual violence? I was really trying to see if I can do it for myself, because it's such a trope. It's such a part of
Westerns.
yeah, like all the women in westerns are there to like as chattel, you know, like you're somebody's reward, you're the thing that they're protecting, or you're the thing that they're avenging, you know. And I was like, well, can can I do it and just not have that be part of it at all? I think I have. There's a point where one older dude, he's not old, kind of tells this girl that she should be an actress. That's about as close as it gets. There's a man who is shot as he is preparing to engage in a consensual sex act, but I don't think that's quite exactly the same. But it was weird to see like don't rape shouldn't be that hard. You know what I mean? Like, okay, can I do this? I got 5 issues. Can we get through it without rape? But it's so much a part of our culture, of the language of this genre work that it's embarrassingly easy to fall into.
It's an easy cliche,
It is.
you know. And as a writer, like the first thing you do is you try to, the cliches come to you and you try to sweep them aside, and that's definitely like one of the, you know, especially if you're dealing with a time period piece, you know, whether it's medieval or Western. You know, then the smart thing is to think your way around that, and how can you be true to the time period, but not.
And we were like specifically trying to cite spaghetti westerns and Japanese pinky violence. Guess what? Those 2 things are super heavy in. You know.
And there's also, you know, I think by the same token, you don't want to pretend something doesn't happen that actually happens. Like if you're in, you know, like in India, what's been going on with the girl who was who died, who was raped and died from her injuries, and it brought out this whole, you know, all these things that still go on, like, you know, an acceptable conclusion to a rape is for the victim and the perpetrator to be married to each other in many parts of that country. You
Like
know,
the Bible.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, so, but again, don't make it cheesy and tacky and titillating, and let's really take a look at what does this mean. You know, I mean, you know, because it's a horrible thing, but it does happen. But you know, you're absolutely right. You don't want it to be. I mean, that's an interesting thing what you're doing. It's almost like, you know, there are things that are wonderful about the genre, the spaghetti western genre. I love it too. You know, but it's almost like, then there's things that you know, it's like going back and reading like some old pulp, you know, like Conan or whatever, and there's like really racist stuff in it.
Yeah.
Skin people
You know.
and stuff.
Yeah. And you're like, okay, can I still like this? I mean, you know, I feel
Yeah.
kind of nasty liking it, you know.
Yeah, I don't know how it's affecting the you know, I don't know how spaghetti western we're going to end up being, but we got a weird book that I'm enjoying that has some interesting gender stuff going on. So I don't know, we'll see.
Well, and Emma makes everything so pretty.
Yeah.
Everything's very pretty. The horses are probably really pretty.
The horses are pretty. The blood splatter is gorgeous.
No.
You know, everything.
Gotta be careful about that.
I know, but it's so nice. I like it.
Oh, and what's the name of the book?
It's called Pretty Deadly.
Nice.
So.
So in the 2 times that I've dealt with this issue in comics, I've always been careful to make that incident to be sort of the catalyst of somebody's actual impetus to want to avenge or to run around and do these things. So Red Sonja was one of them, and I eventually had to do the origin story. And you know, the question was, you know, we had big conversations with Dynamite about how to go about this and stuff, and ultimately she really gets her power from who she is, not what happened to her. And part of who she is had to do with mythology and stuff that we built into the story, but dealing with the actual attack itself, again, in no way did I want it to be titillizing, especially in a Dynamite book with Red Sonja and stuff.
Right.
So we made I had the scene happen, because I still had to show it. I had it mostly happen off panel, and from her point of view. So there was no way anybody could put themselves in the attacker's point of view. You had to see it through Red Sonja's eyes, and then, but not all of it, of course, because I just didn't. There was just no way to go that close into it, especially because she was a child too. But I made sure that her power source was from the mythological events around her life, not because of the actual attack, but make sure that the attack is something that she carries with her for the rest of her life. And then in the victories was a similar thing where a male character is molested as a child. And that becomes kind of the pinpoint of his origin. But again, he's not carrying around, that wasn't the catalyst, well, kind of was the catalyst for his powers, but it was a whole way that it would kind of screw around with him for the rest of his life, carrying this thing, like, and everything that he did was attached to this.
Well, and with him, with the character of Faustus in the victories, he had this like latent power. He had these latent powers, right? And then he trained with somebody who was supposed to bring it out in him, or did the mark give him the powers? So
Spoilers here, but we're here for this reason, so it's okay. So yeah, the mark, his martial arts teacher, is giving him powers, but he's using molestation as a way to get to kids. And we've seen this before in the news. Like there are teachers who use their teaching classes to get close to kids. Their martial arts has been there's a lot of that going on in martial arts. There's a lot of teachers who are touching their kids and stuff. So don't give your kids extra special private classes with your teachers if you don't know them. But I wanted to take that a little bit further. So yeah, the teacher. So that's the screw in his mind, is that he did get his abilities from this, and it is something that's haunted him. And then the teacher is still teaching at the point that we start the story out, and then we have to question, like, does he go on that that rampage or not?
Yeah, and the way that everything's structured, he is throughout the story and forever after the story completely screwed with by the way that
it's something you carry with, and you can't wrap it up. Like,
Yeah.
and that's the other thing in comics, is we tend to think that we can solve an issue like that, and the truth is nobody can. You can maybe come to terms with it, but it's always going to be with you. That kind of stuff. You know, it's not like Red Sonja's. You know, like, oh yeah, that happened to me as a kid, but I've killed so many people now, I'm okay.
Right.
You know, like, she's still, carrying it with her. You know, and anybody who's been through that situation, you carry it with you, no matter how healthy you get or not get.
Yeah, I did in Avengers Academy, I had a character who was, as a child, he was, his mom wanted to be, the whole point was that his mom was a horrible person who was like Honey Boo Boo's mom, let's say, and was making him act, and their manager, his acting manager, was molesting him, but when he actually started to do this, that's when he got his powers and killed the guy. It wasn't the source of his powers, but anyway, aside from the electrical powers, I got this story from the guy who played Willis on Different Strokes. This is what happened to him. The point is, it started to happen, he told his mother, and his mother was like, you're lying, because she wanted the money from the
that's super prevalent in Hollywood. The Corey Haim and Corey Feldman.
Right.
Just before the one died of a drug overdose, they had this sort of reality meeting or whatever it was, and they were talking about how they were basically passed back and forth between directors and producers.
Yeah.
And this is prevalent in Hollywood.
It's
this is a known thing, but nobody talks about it because you're mixing power
with
sex and power and blackmail
and money.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, but what I did with it in Todd Bridges' case, he grew up confused about his sexual identity. He's straight, but he grew up because it was a male who had molested him. In my case, the character was gay, but instead of being comfortable with who he was, he spent his adolescence having sex with lots of girls to prove that this guy hadn't made him gay.
What book was this in?
Avengers Academy.
What's going on in Avengers, man?
They canceled the book. Thank you. It was very painful.
Sorry.
No.
Yeah, but you got a hell of a run out of that
40
book.
issues. No,
Yeah,
I'm not
dude.
complaining.
I mean,
am not complaining
in a
at all.
contemporary,
Yeah.
right on.
Yeah, people love
No,
it.
I'm actually just kidding. I cannot be happier with how Marvel supported that book, and it was terrific. And the fans were great. So.
Well, that's also an interesting metaphor about how superheroes, are acting out. So this guy was sleeping around to kind of prove something to himself, whereas possibly somebody like Batman is constantly beating up villains to.
Well, I love Howard Chaykin's description of Batman as a guy who had a really bad day when he was 8, and he's been beating up people ever since.
Yeah, get over it, man.
But what I think would be an interesting story is like a Elseworld story is Batman's parents come back and they're like, hey, we were in witness protection, actually, we're not dead. You can stop beating people up now. And he's like, no, I kind of like doing that. I'm just going to keep.
So, can you maybe speak to some books right now that are handling their female protagonists really well, their heroes really well in their stories.
Captain Marvel.
Yeah.
You know what I like are the ones where, and you look back to when Marvel first started trying to do more women heroes. It was like, look, women heroes. You know, I love the ones like Captain Marvel, who is a fantastic. I love what you've done with the character, and Kurt Busiek did a lot of good stuff with her as well. She's not a female hero. She's a hero who's a female,
hero
and then
who
her
happens
form.
to be a female.
Yeah, and that is, she's not. I mean, you couldn't just, I'm not to suggest that you make her a dude and everything's exactly the same, but it's not like, like when they introduced. I love the character of Tigra, but when they introduced her as the cat, it was like, oh well, she started out as a housewife, but then she became a feminist, and now she's a hero, and it was really very ham-fisted.
I like the way Mike Mignola and the rest of us who work on his books handle the female characters in Hellboy and all the Hellboy-related books. They're just like the other characters. I mean, Mike especially, but also John.
That's so crazy.
I know, it's weird, it's crazy. But yeah, we basically handle them the way we'd handle anybody else. And I've had people complain that like Liz Sherman is often, other people are kind of trying to hijack her power. And it's like, well, people do that to Hellboy every other story. So I don't think we're being anti-feminist to Liz. I think that's just kind of Mike's,
And Mike
trope.
still writes her as a woman. I mean, it's not like he's. Sometimes you can go the opposite way. Is then writing a female character like a dude who just happens to have breasts,
Right.
which isn't the same thing as being.
Yeah.
That's just
Like,
tough.
I don't care if I don't require that your female characters be upstanding individuals. I'm kind of a bitch, like
You are not. You're so sweet.
Sometimes
The difference between the editor and the friend.
I am wildly imperfect. I don't require that all of the female characters that people write be role models. I don't want them to be. What I do require is that that you allow them to be the protagonists in their own stories, and when you include women in your other books, magically, just like men, they need to be there as individuals with agency, with their own motivations and their own desires and their own lives. If I can, we talk about the Bechdel Test.
Do people know what that is, the Bechdel Test?
Okay, so
Yeah,
Bechdel
real
Test,
quick.
real quick, is 3 questions. Are there 2 named women in your story? Do they talk to each other? And is it about something that isn't a man? Or their sex life, I would say, is another aspect of it too. If it's, because sometimes it's basically if you are about your love life, then you're not really an entirely whole human being. But the Bechdel Test has pluses and minuses. Like, basically for me, it boils down to what I call the sexy lamp test, which is if I can take your female character out and put a sexy lamp in their place, you're a fucking hack. And it happens. It happens. Like this female character is there as a reward. She is there as something to be protected. She is there as something to be avenged. She's not there as a human being. She's literally there as a sexy lamp. And that is not writing. That is not using your imagination to get into the heads of other characters and tell stories about the way human beings interact. That is not going to. That contributes nothing to the world. Sit down, shut up.
It'd be more impressive if it was actually a sexy lamp.
Yeah,
Somebody was avenging.
Yeah.
I'm thinking
That
of
would be way
the
more
lamp in A
interesting.
Christmas
Yeah,
Story,
Christmas
the one
Story.
that's a leg.
Then he goes
We
on a
need that
killing
thing to
spree,
pop
like,
up more.
you broke my lamp.
That's right. I want to write that book now.
Yeah.
Part 2, Christmas Story Part 2.
Yeah, nobody's
Oh my
seen it,
God.
right? No.
I'd like to write it from the point of view of the lamp.
Of the lamp. Yeah.
Feeling all objectified and
Yeah,
not
yeah.
appreciated.
Oh, she's back and she's pissed off.
And I'm not from Italy.
Yeah.
Fragile.
She's Chinese. So.
Taiwanese, definitely.
So we will open up the floor to any questions that you might have for the panelists. Anyone? Up to the mic, please.
Yeah, they're
Please approach the mic.
streaming
Yeah,
this or something.
come on.
It's one of those things. Any questions? Could you
It's
go
not
up to the
electrified,
mic?
don't worry.
The mic. No?
Yes. Sorry. Is the mic on?
Is it on?
Tap it.
Yes, it's on.
Okay.
Speak close to it.
Okay. So you all mentioned that rape and radioactive spiders are not very sophisticated ways of moving from victim to hero. I was wondering what are some more sophisticated ways, if you could sketch that out or mention your favorite characters who don't have those easy tropes that you've been talking about.
Well, no disrespect to radioactive spiders, right? I think we're all.
No, yeah.
Oh, no, no.
Yeah. We didn't mean to criticize that.
Especially me. I'm the biggest Spider-Man nerd there is. But no, I mean, I guess what I was trying to say is that, you know, the radioactive spider was a device which gave Spider-Man his powers. The point was not to spend the rest of, you know, his life dealing with, you know, what was that spider doing there, and you know what. But rape should not be the same. You know, you can give your characters powers with a meteor that falls from space, you know, rather
Yeah.
than something that happens to real people in the real world
Yeah,
and
don't
devastates
belittle-
lives. Yeah.
Yeah.
They've got to want something. They've got to be driven to be heroic. And the problem isn't that nobody could ever be motivated by being a victim or being a victim of rape. The problem is that too many times in comics, all the writers can come up with, well,
Right.
how do I motivate my female character? Oh, well, revenge and rape. Like that, it always works. Like Nazi villains, it
Yeah.
always works. So the problem's not that it's such a terrible idea. It's that it's such an easy fallback, and it's lazy to do it over and over
Yeah.
again. It's you need to motivate your characters one way or another. You need to motivate your hero maybe to protect someone they love. If the only way you can think to do that is to have the person they love get raped, then you're just not thinking hard enough.
Yeah, and a good example of how it works is Spider-Man. If you think about it, like the reason why he's a hero, so he gets his powers from the spider, but the reason why he's a hero is because of a deeper understanding that comes through his uncle. And it's not even his uncle's death. He's not running around avenging his uncle's death.
Right.
He comes to a greater understanding of himself that with great power comes great responsibility.
The bad decision he made is what motivates him.
And that's
Yeah.
the deeper motivation. That's what a writer should strive for, not, I got bit by a spider, I'm so pissed
Yeah.
now.
Carol Danvers, she gets her powers when the psychic magnetron explodes and it transfers the DNA of Marvel. And but you know, she gets her thing that makes her who she is because her dad, who loved her desperately, told her that he could afford to send 2 of his kids to school and he was going with the boys because Carol was probably going to get married and she didn't really need an education anyway. So, and that kind of wound where she spends the next history of the book kind of trying to prove to her dad that she was worth as much as her brothers. And that's it's a wound. I think that in all of the most iconic characters in this genre, the wound is what powers their journey, you know. And she's trying to be a hero. She's trying to prove to her dead dad now that, you know, that she was worth as much. And it's not that he didn't love her. He wasn't a mustache twirling, you know, villain. He was a product of his time, but it hurt her. You know?
It hurt her, and the hurt is personal, and it means something. It's not just like, it's not just...
And it's relatable, I think is important.
That's very relatable.
Yeah.
I got to run to my next panel. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
for being here.
Yeah, how far has the industry progressed or not progressed to where you're writing a great story, but and then it's sent to like the publisher, and then just looked at some middleman on a spreadsheet going, this will never sell, we'll never get enough copies, throwing a rape, you know? Yeah.
I don't think it's ever that flagrant, you know what I mean? And I mean, obviously it's gotten a lot better. We still have to deal with the fact that, and Captain Marvel being an exception recently with the McKelvey costume, but we still have to deal with the fact that, I don't know who it was who said that, you know, these women are going into battle without pants on. You know what I mean? Who would do that? I mean,
And you know, and here's the thing. Like, I'm gonna try to make this really short, because boy, I could do a whole panel on this. But I get it. The early female hero costumes were based on the idea of gymnasts, you know, and they look like gymnasts. Gymnasts who wear thigh boots and opera gloves, but okay. But as we make these characters more contemporary, we do start to think of them as, you know, female warriors. And when we talk about, the problem is that, like, I hear it defended in this, well, like, you know, the male figures are idealized too. The male figures are idealized to look strong. The female figures are idealized to look sexually available. That is not my ideal. That might be your ideal of a female character, but that's not the one I'm making. You know what I mean? Like, that's the difference. It's sexual availability is not idealized. It's porn.
And I think there is, you know, fandom is very tradition-minded, and I think to some degree there is a little bit of like, well, Power Girls always had the boob window. Why'd you change the costume? You know what I mean? But you know, like you said, we're coming. You know, things change, times change, people get more enlightened, and I think it can be time to. But to answer your question, I don't think anyone would ever say throw in a rape. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It would be more like, you know, we need something stronger to motivate this character. You know, but
We need to shake up the status quo.
Yeah.
I've never heard. I think people assume that the editorial is a lot more dictatorial than has been my experience.
Thank you.
Hi, so what do you think about the trend in Marvel comics now with brainwashing, which is mental rape, especially in Secret Avengers, the new one, where it's marketed as for fans of the Avengers movie, but Black Widow is, even though she had just been brainwashed in Winter Soldier, is brainwashed again, and then has, you know, her boobs are like lovingly shaded and like huge and stuff. So just wondering, what do you guys think about that and how it's sort of objectifying her and also having like kind of mind rape?
Well, that's definitely, I mean, that's definitely just as personal for people as, you know, if you've been through like a cult experience or an abusive relationship that gets into your head, or actually, I mean, there are documented cases of, you know, back in the day when the CIA was doing experiments on people and giving them LSD and putting them into what they called sleep driving, I think it was, where they kept them asleep for months and, you know, gave them messages in their heads and stuff like that. I mean, that ruined people's lives just as much. It's a different kind of thing, and but I don't think we've really given it real thought about that in comics.
Yeah.
I'll be honest.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, I have, because I'm doing a head thing with Carol right now, and it was very scary for me to sort of figure out how to navigate these waters so that she never loses her agency. You know, and it's weird for me too. Like, I love cosplayers. Oh my God, I love cosplayers. I am so freaked out by Lady Loki. I'm like, dude, you're wearing Sif's skin. Like, that is nasty. That is like, you know, it's super creepy.
There was a legitimate concern about the Spider-Man Dr. Octopus situation right now, where, you know, that was, we could go on about that for a really long time. I mean, I think that was short-sightedness, not done on purpose, but it's obviously a thing.
Oh, sweet. That's awesome. I did not even realize that you were Lady Loki, so I promise you that was not addressed at you. But yeah, like, there are some gorgeous, gorgeous Lady Lokis, and it's okay to dress as something creepy, but it is that one thing where I'm like, oh, I'm so creeped out by that. Okay.
I think that mind wiping is, again, it's an easy device to fall back on for any number of characters. And, you know, Black Widow is a character who's supposed to be chronologically, what is she, 100 years old?
I think she'd be in her 70s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But still, yeah.
So it's almost like, you know, again, as usual, Joss does it pretty well with River. I haven't seen Dollhouse yet. But, you know, it's a very painful thing for her. So it's like, yeah, you know, it's a legitimate device, but there's a hacky way to do it, and there's a good way to do it.
Unfortunately, we are like seriously out of time, or getting there. We have like 30 seconds left. So thank you all for coming. Thank you to our panelists for having such wonderful, insightful things to share with us. And have a great con. Thank you.
Thank you.
so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you for having us.
That was a really great question.